2003 in the Selectman's office in Ashby, Massachusetts. This videotaped interview is being done by the Ashby Historical Society, participating in the United States Veterans History Project, a project in which our veterans have been asked to share their stories while in the armed services. The tape that we are making will be kept here in Ashby and will then be listed and cataloged in the Library of Congress, along with those listings of veterans all over this country. So with us this morning is Mr. Larry Swope, who will be interviewed by Janet Offris. Mr. Swope, you have lived in Ashby about how many years?
Almost 18 years.
Almost 18 years. And what branch of service were you in?
United States Army.
United States Army. In which war?
Korean War and Vietnam War.
Korean War and Vietnam War.
I was a career soldier.
You were a career soldier. So when did you go in?
First time I went in was toward the end of the Korean War. And then I got out. And there was nobody at that time that had an education in the family. I went home. Pleased, my mother got enough credits for a high school diploma. And I went back in January of 1955. And then I stayed in until spring of 1979. I had almost 25 years of service.
Oh, very good. So you enlisted then?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Well, why don't we start with the progression in the service? Where was your boot camp training, and what were some of your experiences there?
My first experience naturally was going to Chicago, Illinois, and enlisting. And at the time, I actually was underage, but I had some help on that. And I was shipped out from there to Fort Leavenworth, Missouri, where they didn't want to accept me at first. I was so tiny. That's, people that know me today said they can never believe I was tiny. But I was only 5 feet tall if someone put their foot under my heel, which at that time you had to be 5 feet tall to be in the Army. And I weighed 117 pounds, and they called me the runt because that stuck with me for a while because I was so tiny. So in Fort Leavenworth, Missouri, at that time they called it combat training. It was a full 16 weeks without going home or visiting your family or anybody. And then to Seattle, Washington, where we got on a boat and went to Korea, which I, like everybody else, when I first saw the shores of Incheon, Korea, I thought, where is this place? What is this? And I was very young. But I stayed in Korea for a while until they completely shut down the war in the summer of '53. I came home and naturally I got my mother diploma and all that for the high school, as a lot of young kids did, took off in those early years in the small hometowns, little farm villages. Then I was off again, and I came to Fort Devens, which I spent quite a bit of time there. In fact, I have a photograph of 1955 when I was at Fort Devens, which I will share with you. And before they tore all the barracks down out there, looked nice, and that's how tiny I was. Which, if you want to make a copy of that,
then we'll zoom in on it, see if we can get
if
it.
you would make a copy of that, I could.
All right, then.
Leave it.
Can you hold it up just a little bit, Janet? That's a little bit higher. Yeah. Okay.
That was the old wooden barracks.
This was at Fort Devens.
And that's 1955. That was the old wooden barracks down by the palm, they called it, inside the gates. And I miss Fort Devens, actually, because I was there a couple of times. From Fort Devens, I went back to Korea because they were still building. It was very, very ugly over there still from the war. The war really didn't get cleaned up till almost 1960. We still had little pockets of trouble over there at the end of 55, 56 era. And I stayed over there, an 18-month tour, as they call it. And even then we had sort of like points to come home, and I came back home. At this time we took a lot of boat trips. We didn't take airplanes like they do today. And there were some experiences themselves, these troop ships.
Tell us about that.
Putting you down in a hole with about 100 people. 5 hammocks, they call it, high, wrapped around a square rectangle. People getting sick. Very nasty time, but I'd learned early because, again, my family, I mean, there's another story too, was all military. My brother, who retired from the Navy, right before I retired from the Army, he'd already told me a lot of horror stories about ships, about don't drink a lot of liquid, the reason why the Navy feeds you beans and biscuits for breakfast, you have to have something dry in your stomach. And, that helped me survive. Because my first trip, I was on the sea for over 30 days. Because someone almost died aboard ship, and they had to stop the ship and have a minor surgery at sea. And we had to go up around Alaska to go to the Far East. But the last trip on a boat was really the worst because there's a difference between a single stack ship and a double stack ship. And I was on a single stack, and it was in the fall when the seas are choppy. And it felt like the boat was just being lifted from fingertips of the ocean to throw us back across to America. But that was another story also. When I came back to Fort Devens again. And from Fort Devens, I thought I didn't want to stay in the Army. They sent me back to Chicago, Great Lakes. And I thought I would try to get a civilian job, which was not too good at that time, in the first part of 1958. So I survived about 30 days, and I said, enough of this, I need to eat, I need to be on my own. So I went down and re-enlisted and went back in.
This is from Chicago?
Yes. And then in 1958, I did a little training then again there at Chicago Great Lakes area. They sent me to Germany. And in Germany, I happened to be in Berlin when they put the Berlin Wall up. I was instrumental in being border security, that's the type of schooling they had at Fort Devens. They taught us was different types of code breaking and Morse code, and interceptor, and cryptograph. I happen to belong to the security agency, in fact, and we worked the border patrols around Germany. And it was very funny because when you was in Berlin, young fellows do drink good German beer when they finally learn and eat good food. That's when I started to get a little weight. But I didn't understand the terminology of the cabs over there. The cabs, if you had a full circle cab, you were safe. If you got into a broken cab by mistake, they're liable to whisk you across into East Germany and get a price for you, which I didn't know, and I almost got trapped one night on one of them. But I was there when they did put the wall up. And from Germany, I came back to the States all for a very short period of time. And I was in Fort Ord, California. And then I went across to Asia again from Fort Ord. That's when I met my soon-to-be wife. And I was over there probably about, I wasn't even gone a year. I came back. I think that's when they had the Cuban crisis starting up. And I came to Massachusetts again. So I've spent some time in Massachusetts.
You mean to Devens?
Yes, and I was training National Guard here in Massachusetts for the Cuban crisis. I only stayed here about 60 days, and then I went back to my assignment in the Far East and finished it.
And where was your assignment in the Far East then?
At that time, it was an island called Kanwado Island. It was off of, I think they called it the Eastern Peninsula. I tried to write a lot of this down so I could remember. But it was called an island. And from there, I went into the, off of the island into what they call the hill stream at that time, where they was building the security agency. And by virtue of meeting my wife, I guess her family had Chinese ties because she's originally Chinese. So they dropped me from the security agency and picked me up into like a combat outfit. And from there, I did get permission to marry, which was something to go through too when you marry a foreign bride.
That's quite a procedure to go through, I'm sure.
And that's when we came back to San Francisco, California. During the 60s, I spent the majority of my time in an overseas area. Because we was not in California that long, we went to Germany, to a place they called Kaiserslautern, Germany. And we lived in the village with a German family, who they didn't speak no English, but it seemed like my wife and the lady got along fine somehow. Because I did speak German, my heritage is German-Polish. and I spoke it, but my wife didn't. But you'd think they both understood each other all the time. From there is when I got my first trip to Vietnam. And I hit Vietnam with a combat. I was 101st Airborne. In fact, I retired double eagle 101st Airborne. And
You'll have to explain a little bit about what the double eagle is.
You wear one patch on one side of your jacket, which resembles the outfit that you're in. And on the other side, you wear your combat patch. If you was in combat, you wear two patches on your jacket. If you was never in combat, you only wear one. And I retired with the 101st Airborne on both sides, with Ranger tabs, because I was attached to a Ranger outfit with the 101st Airborne.
Well, the 101st Airborne has been very much in the news.
Oh,
that's
my old outfit.
That's your old outfit,
yes.
Huh? Interesting.
In fact, I even called them up and asked if they could use me, but they said they couldn't use me.
Oh, you did?
But no, I was with the 101st Airborne. I did my 18 to 20 months in Vietnam, all total.
Where were you in Vietnam?
Actually, I was everywhere. That's where it comes into play for memory. They have such a thing they call TDY, temporary duties, or SDs as special duties. I served a month or so with the Special Forces, what they call in the Highland countries of Vietnam. I left them with what they call a 9-man squad, and I also hooked up with the 2nd 17th Rangers when we went into Cambodia when we wasn't supposed to. Of course, the American government said if we was ever caught, they didn't know us, things like that. But there's many stories that I can't remember too well from Vietnam, but it was just a nightmare. I was very glad to get out of it. And when I came back from Vietnam, I had got medevaced. I was hurt. They sent me to Korea for some reason. I spent so much time overseas when I came back finally to the United States in 1972, I didn't even know what cars and television was like hardly. I couldn't even, the person said, look at that nice car. I had no idea what it was. Because I spent 9 years overseas in the 60s, with only coming to the States for a short period. And in 1973, I served 1 year, which was one of the longest stateside tours I'd had since the 50s. I was at Augusta, Georgia. I taught at the police academy for the military police and the military. I taught hand-to-hand combat, martial arts.
So when had you trained for that?
I did that a lot on my own, even when I was in Asia, because not because my wife was Asian, but I was always interested in the martial arts. I learned the original, what they called over there, the karate, not the taekwondo, the actual karate, the hapkido with the lock and chains and what they call handheld positions, the death positions.
And your wife, is she a martial artist?
No, she's not, but she's very health enthusiast. She's still today at her age. She's not as old as I am, much older than her, but she still runs 3 or 4 times a week. She still runs around the parks and don't stop, mile ovals. She hadn't gained a pound in years. She worries if she gains one, but so she's a very health enthusiast. I was interested in the martial arts. I didn't marry my wife. I was almost 29. I've been on the road about 13 years.
That's another story. Can we interrupt you and ask you how you met?
Actually, I got hurt, and it was carousing, as soldiers do. We was having what's called Barracks sorties with the Air Force and the Marines and the other United Nations compounds in the Yeongjong-po, Korea area. And
now tell me what you mean by sorties. Do you mean?
We would sneak in on their barracks,
okay,
cut their power maybe, and tie a few of them in their bed or whatever, and have fights.
Gotta have a little humor in our life, right?
So one night when I was probably out of my mind, I was taken to this little like church hospital and was touching up some bruises on my head. this lady that was taking care of me was a very young lady, and I kept noticing her, and I went back later and I asked who was the lady that patched me up that night before I came back to the company, and they told me who she was. And then I said I would like to meet her. And of course I had to go through a complete chain of command with the father. And finally was able to meet her, but anytime I came to the house, if I stayed too long, I stayed one end of the house, the father stayed in the middle, and the kids stayed on the other end. You weren't allowed to even intermingle during TV. If you had watched any TV or listened to any radios, you sat in the father's room. So long story short, I came back on several weekends and I did a date with her. And then within 1 year, I asked her to marry me. So.
Now, where were you then? Were you on this island?
I was on the island. She was in outside of Seoul, Korea.
Okay.
In a place called.
So the island was off of Korea then?
I was on the island, and I was. We'd come into Seoul like a lot of the kids did here at Fort Devens. They used to go to Boston and race game. But we would come in. We'd get a weekend off, which was not always. It's all according to how we was doing. We'd get a weekend off. We'd go to town. That's how I met her. Like I said, a year later, I had to go through that too, to asking the government if I could get married. I had to ask permission. I had to be educated by the church people about what I was doing. Even though I told them I was almost 29 years old, I felt I knew what I was doing.
Now, what church people was this?